People ask me what the war was like. I have been asked that question more times than I can count, sitting in Bag End with my grandchildren around me, and the fire going and the stars bright over the hill. They want the battles mostly. They want fire and sword and the great lords of men riding out of the dawn. And those things happened. I was close enough to all of it to smell the smoke and hear the horns. But that is not where my story starts, and it is not the first thing I think of when someone says the words War of the Ring. The first thing I think of is a road at night and Mr. Frodo walking ahead of me into the dark, and me wondering, with every step, what in the wide world I had gotten myself into. But I am getting ahead of myself. That is a habit of mine, always has been. My name is Samwise Gamgee, son of Hamfast Gamgee, who kept the gardens at Bag End for old Mr. Bilbo Baggins for 30-odd years, and then for Mr. Frodo after Mr. Bilbo went off on his second adventure. I grew up with soil under my fingernails and a pruning knife in my hand, learning which plants loved shade and which wanted full sun from first light to last. I never expected to go anywhere that did not have good Shire earth under my feet. I never wanted to. That sounds small, maybe, to people hearing this long after. It might sound like something to be ashamed of, but I have had a long time to think about it, and I believe with my whole heart that the love of home is not a small thing. It is actually what the whole story is about, if you press me on it. The question underneath everything that happened was whether the Shire would still be there when it was over, whether the pipeweed fields would still stand, and the mill, and the market, and the children running down Bagshot Row on summer evenings. That was what Mr. Frodo carried the ring for. That was what all of it was for. Not glory, not a throne, not the songs they would sing about it afterward. Home. I was born the youngest of the Gamgee children and grew up in number 3, Bagshot Row, which sat just below Bag End on the hill. My father, the gaffer, was the finest gardener in Hobbiton, and I say that not out of love but out of plain fact. He could coax roses out of clay and keep a vegetable bed producing through a cold, wet summer that would have beaten anybody else. What he taught me was not just gardening. It was patience. It was looking at a thing and seeing what it needed, not what you wanted it to be. I grew up listening to stories too. That was Mr. Bilbo's fault, or rather his gift. He had a way of telling tales about dragons and dwarves and distant mountains that made the Shire feel like it sat at the center of a much larger world. I would sit in the garden while I weeded or staked tomatoes, and he would come out and start talking, and an hour would pass before either of us noticed. He told me about the Lonely Mountain and Smaug and the Battle of 5 Armies so many times I could have recited it in my sleep. But the tales I loved best were the ones about the elves. There is something about the elves that reaches a part of me no other story touches. Their beauty and their sadness, and the way they carry both things at once, the way they love the world more than any other creature, and precisely because they love it that much, they are already grieving for it. Mr. Bilbo said once that elves could see what was being lost, even while it was still there. He said, that is why their songs made you want to weep before you could say what you were weeping for. I did not know then that I would end up walking through the Golden Wood and sitting in Rivendell and sailing the river with elves singing from both banks. I did not know I would meet Lady Galadriel and look into her eyes and feel like she could see every corner of me all at once and not be frightened by what she saw. All I knew was that I loved those stories, and that they made the world feel bigger than Bagshot Row. Mr. Frodo was different from Mr. Bilbo in most ways, but not in that one. He had absorbed everything Mr. Bilbo had ever written down and added plenty of his own. He learned Elvish, which was something only the most devoted scholars in the Shire bothered with. He and Mr. Bilbo used to sit in the study and recite passages to each other in it, laughing at something in a tongue I could not follow. I helped in the garden and listened through the window sometimes, understanding nothing but loving the sound. I was his gardener by the time I was grown. His gardener and, I will say it plainly, his friend, though I did not use that word to him for a long time. Hobbits of different stations do not always bridge that gap. But Mr. Frodo treated me like a person whose thoughts mattered, and that was enough. When he talked, I listened. When I talked, he did the same. If that is not friendship, I do not know what is. I am telling you all this because I need you to understand who I was before any of it started. A gardener, a story lover, a hobbit who had never been farther from home than the bounds of the Shire, and who was perfectly happy keeping it that way. That is who walked into the dark with Frodo Baggins. That is who came back. The trouble started, as trouble so often does, with information I was not supposed to have. Gandalf came to Bag End in the spring, which was not unusual. Gandalf had been coming to Bag End my whole life, but this time he stayed longer than usual, and the conversations behind the closed study door went on deep into the night, and even I, who was not in the habit of prying, could feel that something had shifted. The wizard seemed to carry a new kind of weight when he walked up the lane, something behind his eyes that had not been there in previous years, and Mr. Frodo came out of those conversations quieter each time. The night I made my mistake, I was trimming the grass on the far side of the garden wall. It was a warm evening, and I was tired, and I will admit I sat down for a rest that stretched longer than it should have. That is when I heard them. Mr. Frodo's voice, low and careful. Gandalf's, lower still. I was not trying to listen, but sound carries in still air, and once I caught the first few words, I froze. Not out of nosiness, out of something closer to dread. The ring Mr. Bilbo had brought back from his adventure was not just a magic trinket, it was the One Ring, the Ring of Power. The thing that Sauron the Dark Lord had poured his will and his cruelty into, the thing he had searched for across 3,000 years, because without it he was diminished, and with it he would cover the whole world in a darkness that would never break. Mr. Bilbo had been carrying that in his pocket. Mr. Frodo had it now. I heard enough to know that it had to leave the Shire, that Sauron's servants, the Nazgul, the 9 ringwraiths who had been kings once and were now something worse than dead, were already moving, that Frodo could not stay in Bag End and could not take the road alone. Then Gandalf's voice said my name. He had known I was there, of course he had. Gandalf always knows. He told me to come out from under the window, which I did, with my face burning, and he looked at me for a long moment, with those eyes that see through things rather than just at them. Then he told Frodo that I would have to go with him, that keeping my mouth shut about what I had heard was not really an option, not now, so the only sensible answer was to have me along. That was how I came to go. Not because I volunteered heroically, not because I stepped forward in some great moment, because I was sitting in the garden with a pair of grass shears when I should have been walking home. My father was not pleased. The gaffer had strong opinions about hobbits staying where they belonged, and a Baggins going off on some grand errand struck him as exactly the sort of irresponsible foolishness that had made Mr. Bilbo a figure of controversy in Hobbiton for decades. He told me I was being dragged off after Mr. Frodo, just like the old Took on his adventure, and that no good would come of it, and that the potatoes needed earthing up before first frost. I told him I would be back before the potatoes. I was not. Mr. Frodo had to sell Bag End. He made a show of moving to Crick Hollow, in Buckland, to give them a reason for leaving the hill. A few of his friends from childhood, Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine Took, insisted on coming along. They already knew about the ring, more or less. They had worked it out by being stubborn and attentive, and not letting Mr. Frodo push them away. Gandalf had gone off on some errand of his own, promising to meet us at the Prancing Pony in Bree. On the day we actually walked out of the Shire, I looked back once. The hill, the gardens, the little doors set into the earthwork slopes, the smell of autumn coming on, the gaffer's potato patch just visible around the bend. Then I turned and followed Mr. Frodo into the unknown, and that was the end of the easy part. We went cross-country at first, through the fields and woods on the eastern side of Hobbiton, trying to stay off the roads. Gandalf had given Mr. Frodo a specific warning about the main road east, the East Road. He said riders would be watching it. He said to take the path through the fields and reach the Bucklebury Ferry before going further. I took that warning seriously. Pippin and Merry thought it was exciting. There is an age at which danger still feels like an adventure, before you have seen enough of it to know better, and both of them were squarely in it. On our second night out, we were crossing a field in the dark when we heard hooves on the lane ahead. All of us went into the ditch without quite deciding to, pressing down into the roots and leaves. The sound came closer. A horse, moving slowly. Something on the horse. Even lying in the dirt, I could feel it. Not cold exactly, not the way winter wind is cold, but something deeper. A wrongness. A sensation like the world going thin. Like the edges of things were becoming less certain. It stopped. I could hear it breathing. Smell something, faintly, like dead flowers, and turned earth. Then it moved on. For a long moment, none of us spoke or moved. When we finally climbed out of the ditch, Mr. Frodo's face had gone pale in a way I did not like, and his hand was at his collar, where he carried the ring on its chain. I had wondered, up to that point, whether Gandalf had been perhaps exaggerating, whether the danger was real in the way he described. Old wizards sometimes spoke in more dramatic terms than the facts required. He had not been exaggerating. Those were the Nazgul, the Ringwraiths, the 9 kings of men who had taken Sauron's rings in the Second Age and been drawn, over centuries, into the shadow until nothing was left of them but hunger and will and their terrible, aching need to recover the One. They served Sauron completely, had no selves anymore, no purposes except his, and they could sense the ring. They could feel it the way a compass needle feels north, irresistibly, from a great distance. We encountered them several more times before we reached the ferry. Farmer Maggot drove us in his wagon through fog so thick you could not see 3 feet ahead, and I sat in the back holding very still while the sound of hooves came and went in the white dark around us. Mr. Frodo sat beside me, not saying anything. He did not need to say anything. We both understood by then what we were running from. The Bucklebury Ferry crossed the Brandywine in about 2 minutes flat, with all 4 of us scrambling aboard and Merry working the rope as fast as he could. The Black Rider reached the bank just as we pushed off. It stood there in the dark and watched us go, and the watching itself felt like a weight on the back of my neck. We spent a night in Crick Hollow, in the house Frodo had pretended to be moving into, and there Merry and Pippin finally revealed that they knew the truth about the ring, more than Frodo had told them, because they had been paying attention in their own affectionate way. They insisted on continuing. Frodo tried to argue them out of it and failed, because Merry and Pippin together are a force that cannot really be argued with. You can only wait them out or give in. We went through the old forest. That was its own kind of nightmare. The trees too close, the paths shifting, a sense of malice that had nothing to do with Sauron and everything to do with something far older and less comprehensible. Old Man Willow ate Merry and Pippin right up to their waists. Tom Bombadil pulled them out and sang over the willow until it let them go, and I watched that with the same feeling I would have watching Lady Galadriel much later. That some things in the world are too large and too strange to fit inside any story you already know. Tom Bombadil's house is a warm memory, sandwiched inside a very dark time. His wife Goldberry gave us a supper I still think about. Tom himself was impossible to explain and impossible to frighten, and those 2 things came from the same source. He was something so entirely himself that the ring had no purchase on him. When Frodo put it on in Tom's house, just to see, he did not disappear. Tom looked right at him and laughed. Whatever Tom Bombadil was, he was beyond the ring's reach. That should be a comforting thought, and it is, but it is a lonely one too. because being beyond the ring's reach also meant being beyond its concern, and the world that needed saving was not his world to save. We left his house the next morning and crossed the Barrow Downs. That was the worst thing that happened to us in the Shire country, the Barrows, and I do not like to think about it long. There was fog, and then there was cold, and then there was nothing. When I woke up in the dark, Mr. Frodo's hand was on my shoulder. He had recited some words Tom Bombadil had taught him, and called Tom's help from inside a burial mound, while a Barrow Wight stood over us with a sword. Tom came. The Wight was driven out. We stood blinking in sunlight and fresh air, with ancient gold all around us, and the memory of something very wrong still hanging in the morning. Then we walked to Bree. The Prancing Pony in Bree was the first inn I had ever been inside, and under different circumstances, I think I would have loved it. It was exactly what I had imagined from Mr. Bilbo's stories: low ceilings, dark wood, a fire going, the smell of pipeweed and good ale, and people from all over talking all at once. Under the actual circumstances, I sat in the corner and tried not to look frightened. Gandalf had not come. That was the first wrong note. He was supposed to be there. The message he had left for Frodo, with the landlord Butterbur, who had forgotten to send it for weeks, said that Frodo should wait for him, but that if a ranger named Strider found him first, he should trust that ranger. The ranger had already found us. He was sitting in the shadows of the common room's most obscure corner, and he had been watching us since we walked in. Tall, with a battered cloak, and a face that had seen considerable weather, and a pair of grey eyes that caught the firelight and gave nothing back. I did not trust him. I want to be honest about this, because later it seems obvious what he was, and how trustworthy. But at that moment, he looked like someone who had been waiting for us with bad intentions, and his name was Strider, which is not a name that inspires confidence. He was a ranger of the north, which in Bree means a wanderer who lives rough and appears in your town occasionally to drink and stare at things. People in Bree regarded rangers the way the Shire regarded anything unfamiliar, with polite suspicion and a preference that they would move along. Frodo made a mess of things in the common room. Pippin started telling the story of Bilbo's disappearing act at his birthday party, which was not a story that should have been told at all, and Frodo lunged across the room to stop him and somehow put the ring on his own finger in the process. He vanished. Every head in the room turned to where he had been. He reappeared a moment later, over by the wall, and I saw the confusion on his face as he pulled the ring off his finger. Strider caught him by the arm. He led us upstairs. In the privacy of that small room, with the door shut and the lock turned, Strider laid out the situation in the particular way he had, which was direct and dry and with the full expectation that you would follow along. He knew about the ring. He knew who Frodo was. He knew that the Black Riders were in Bree already, asking questions. He said he could get us to Rivendell if we were willing to go with him and willing to trust him enough to do what he said. Frodo looked at him for a long moment. Then he said yes. Strider took us through the back ways out of Bree in the morning, after the Nazgul had stabbed our empty beds in the inn and found nobody there. We had slept upstairs while he watched through the night. By the time daylight came, 5 Black Riders had ridden through Bree in the dark, which was enough to leave the whole town shaken. The road to Rivendell, the lone lands that stretch east of Bree into increasingly wild country, showed me for the first time what the world outside the Shire actually looked like. Broken, old. The ruins of things that had been great before my grandfather's grandfather was born. Fallen towers and overgrown road cuts, and the traces of paths that went nowhere, because wherever they had been going, had stopped existing centuries ago. Strider moved through it all like he had been walking it his whole life, which he had. He knew where to camp and where to find water and where the paths were that did not show on any map the Shire had ever produced. He talked when talking was useful and kept quiet when it was not, and after a few days, I started to feel something that was not yet trust, but was at least the beginning of the idea that trust might be possible. There was something else about him that I caught slowly: the sadness. Strider carried a grief that was old and settled, and not something he expected anyone to fix. I did not know yet what it was about: the long years of his people's diminishment, the woman he loved and could not reach, the duty that had defined him since before I was born. I would learn all of it later. What I registered then was the sadness, and I remember thinking it made him seem more trustworthy, not less. Pretenders do not usually bother to carry real grief. We reached Weathertop on the 5th day out from Bree. It was an ancient watchtower on a long hill, ruined down to its foundations, with views in every direction. Strider had been hoping we might find word from Gandalf there, some signal or message, and there were signs that someone had been on the hilltop recently. But no Gandalf, just cold wind and the smell of old stone. That night we sheltered in a hollow at the base of the hill, and I made a small fire because the others were cold, and I thought surely we were hidden enough in that hollow that it would not draw attention. I was wrong. The Black Riders came up the hill in the dark, 5 of them. We saw them coming, shapes darker than the night itself, blotting out the stars. Merry and Pippin and I froze. Frodo did something I did not understand then, and still find hard to explain. He put the ring on. I know why. I understand it now. The ring pulled at him. The ring-wraiths pull at the ring, and the ring pulls at its wearer toward them. And in moments of overwhelming fear, the temptation to vanish, to simply not be there in the ordinary world anymore, must have been enormous. He put it on and stepped forward, and the world he stepped into was not the world I could see. What I saw from outside was Frodo staggering and crying out and then falling. What I did was grab a branch from the fire and run at the black shapes, screaming, probably, and waving it. I do not remember what I said or thought. I remember the heat from the brand in my hand and the terrible absence where those shapes stood, like holes cut in the dark. One of them had a long blade. I saw the blade more clearly than I saw anything else. Strider came over the rim of the hollow and drove them back. He had flaming branches too, one in each hand, and he moved with a sureness that made them give ground. They retreated. The night went quiet. Frodo lay on the ground with an injury in his left shoulder that was more than an ordinary injury. The Morgul knife that made it was designed to break off, to leave a sliver in the flesh that would work its way inward to the heart, and if it reached the heart, Frodo would become one of them. A wraith, a shadow wearing the shape of what he had been. We had to get him to Rivendell. We had about 2 weeks before the fragment worked its way to his heart, and Rivendell was a week or more away, and Frodo was already fading, his hand going cold, his eyes losing their focus. Every day brought that sliver of blade closer to finishing what the knife had started. I carried his pack and tried to make him as comfortable as movement allowed, which was not very comfortable at all. The lone lands offered no mercy. The paths were rough, and the weather came in cold and wet. Frodo walked when he could, and Strider half carried him when he could not. I watched Mr. Frodo's face grow paler and more distant with each passing day, and felt a helplessness that was the worst thing I had experienced up to that point. Then an elf lord came out of the trees. Glorfindel was his name, and he had been sent from Rivendell to find us. He put Frodo on his white horse and sent the horse ahead at a gallop, because the Nazgul were behind us, closer than we had thought. At the ford of Bruinen, where the road crosses the river on the edge of Rivendell's borders, all 9 riders converged on Frodo at once, and the horse stood in the middle of the ford, and Frodo turned and defied them, told them they could not have the ring, with the last of whatever strength he had left. The river rose, flooding, white water, shapes like horses in the foam. The Nazgul were driven back into the water and carried off downstream. Their horses, which were real horses under a shadow, were swept away. The 9 were unhorsed and temporarily broken, scattered to reform later when Sauron could rebuild them. Frodo passed out in the ford and did not wake up for 3 days. Rivendell was everything I had hoped for and more, and the timing of my first sight of it was such that I could not properly appreciate any of it because Mr. Frodo was unconscious and I was terrified. Elrond Half-Elven, who had lived since the First Age and healed the battle casualties of 2 wars against Sauron already, worked on the shoulder for hours. Gandalf stood outside the room and told me eventually that it was going to be all right, and I sat down on the floor of the corridor and stayed there for a while. When Frodo woke, he found me asleep in the chair beside him. Bilbo was there too, much older and much smaller than any version of him I had seen before, the long carrying of the ring having taken its toll even after he had given it up. He still had his sharpness and his warmth, just compressed somehow, like a fire burning on less fuel. I wandered Rivendell in the days that followed and tried to take it all in. Elves who had been alive for thousands of years, who had watched kingdoms rise and fall and been there for the forging of the rings of power, walked under those arched galleries and sang in the evenings, and every note they hit carried that quality Mr. Bilbo had described, beauty that had grief built into it, because they knew how much had already been lost and how much more was coming. The Council of Elrond happened on a morning of thin autumn sunlight. Representatives had come from all across the known world. Gloin the dwarf, who had walked to Mordor and back with Bilbo Baggins 60 years before, the elves of Mirkwood under Legolas. Men from Gondor under Boromir, who was tall and proud and looking for a weapon to use against Sauron rather than a problem to solve, and Gandalf, who had been captured by the traitor Saruman and escaped from the top of Orthanc by the skin of his teeth, or rather, by the back of an eagle. I hid myself in the gallery above and listened to all of it. Mr. Frodo was seated in the council, and I was not supposed to be there, but nobody saw me, or if they did, nobody said anything. I am small and can be quiet when I need to be. I heard the history of the ring, how Sauron had forged it in the fires of Orodruin, Mount Doom, in the Second Age, and how the last alliance of elves and men had defeated him and cut the ring from his finger, how Isildur, son of the last king of Gondor, had refused to cast it into the fire that was the only thing in the world that could destroy it, and had kept it, and been destroyed by it, how it had slipped off Isildur's finger in the Gladden fields, and lay at the bottom of a river for centuries, how a creature named Smeagol had found it, and killed his cousin for it, and gone underground with it for 500 years, becoming Gollum. How Bilbo had found Gollum and tricked the ring away from him and carried it unwitting back to the Shire. The council debated what to do. Boromir wanted to wield it against Sauron. Elrond said that was impossible. The ring would betray any hand but its makers. Gandalf said the only answer was to destroy it, and the only place it could be destroyed was where it had been made, in the fires of Orodruin, in the heart of Mordor itself. Nobody wanted to say who would carry it. Mr. Frodo said he would. His voice was small and a little unsteady, like he knew the weight of what he was saying and was saying it anyway. He said he would take the ring to Mordor, into Sauron's own country, into the shadow. A silence fell over the whole council that felt like something you could touch. I dropped out of the gallery. Elrond looked at me. Gandalf looked at me. Everybody looked at me. I said that Mr. Frodo was not going anywhere without me. That was the truest thing I said during the entire War of the Ring, and the one I have never once regretted. 9 walkers went south from Rivendell on a cold December night, chosen to oppose the 9 ringwraiths, Frodo and me, Gandalf. Aragorn, who was Strider's real name, heir to the throne of Gondor, through a line that went back to Isildur's brother and ran unbroken through 38 generations of rangers. Legolas of the Elves of Mirkwood, Gimli son of Gloin, representing the dwarves, Boromir of Gondor, and Merry and Pippin, because they refused to be left out and Gandalf said they had a right to share in the danger they would have shared anyway. The first major obstacle was the Misty Mountains. We tried to cross by the High Pass, the Redhorn Gate, and the mountain defeated us. Not Sauron, just the mountain. Snow came in from nowhere, deep and fast, and then rocks came with it, flung from above, and then a cold settled in that went past cold into something active, something that wanted us off that slope. Caradhras is what they call the mountain, the cruel red. It earned the name. We came down off the pass, beaten and half frozen, and Gandalf and Aragorn debated the other option, the Mines of Moria. I had no strong opinion on this. I had no context for evaluating the relative dangers of high mountain passes versus ancient dwarf mines that had been lost to something terrible decades ago. What I could tell from the debate was that both options frightened the people around me, and that the mountain had just driven us back, and that in the end, the choice made itself. Moria. The doors into Moria are on its west side, in a cliff face above a dark lake, and they are invisible unless you catch the moonlight at the right angle. Gandalf spent a while puzzling over the inscription and then solved the riddle just as the lake came alive behind us. Something with long arms pulled Frodo toward the water, and I got hold of him and pulled back, and Aragorn cut the tentacle off, and we all ran for the doors. We were inside Moria for 3 days. I say that flatly because that is how it felt from the inside. Flat. The vast dark pressed everything down to the immediate, the next step, the next torchlit corridor, the next decision about which passage went up versus which went deeper. The dwarves who had built this place had built it on a scale that made ordinary life feel like something happening very far away. Pillars as big as ancient trees. Halls you could fit the whole of Hobbiton into. Stairs carved from the rock going up 7 flights with no railing, and a drop on one side that went down farther than you could see. On the 3rd day, we found the Chamber of Mazarbul, where Balin had led a colony of dwarves 23 years before, and where all of them had died. Gimli found the record of their last stand in the dust. There was barely time to take it in before the drums started. The drums in the deep. Orcs came from every opening. Boromir and Aragorn held the door and bled doing it. Frodo got thrown against the wall by a troll spear and lay still, and I thought he was dead, until he got up again, unhurt, because Bilbo had given him a coat of mithril rings under his cloak that no ordinary weapon could pierce. That coat was worth more than the whole Shire, Gandalf said later, and Bilbo had given it to his nephew as a going-away present, without quite knowing what it was worth. We ran, down and down through the dark, across a bridge, the bridge of Khazad-dûm, old and narrow and arching over a chasm so deep you could not see the bottom. We got across. Most of us. Gandalf faced the Balrog on the bridge. I know what a Balrog is now. Then I saw a shape of fire and shadow, taller than the hall, with a whip of flame in one hand and a sword of fire in the other. I saw Gandalf stand in the middle of that narrow bridge and say to it, in a voice that came from somewhere older than anything I had seen in the Shire, that it would not pass. The Balrog's sword broke on Gandalf's staff. The bridge cracked under the Balrog's weight. It fell, but as it fell, its whip came up and caught Gandalf's ankle and pulled him over the edge. He grabbed the bridge's lip. His hands held for a moment. Then he let go. He said, as he fell, "Fly, you fools." We flew, out through the east gate and down the long stairs into the sunlight of the valley below Moria. We came out, blinking and gasping, and Aragorn kept us moving until we were well away from the gate, and then we stopped, and everyone who was going to break down did, and I sat on a rock and kept my eyes on the ground and tried to understand that Gandalf was gone. Gandalf, who had been the fixed point of the whole enterprise, who knew things and could do things, and who had a plan for nearly everything and a backup plan for the rest. gone down into the dark under a mountain, falling alongside something ancient and terrible, and not coming back up. I did not know then about what he was, not fully, that he was one of the Maiar, a spirit who had come into the world in the form of an old man specifically to oppose Sauron, and that what fell in Moria was the form he had been given, and that what rose from the mountaintop days later was the same spirit renewed, no longer grey but white. He told us later, very matter-of-factly, he died and came back, as one does. On that day, sitting in the sunlight outside Moria's eastern gate, all I knew was that he was gone, and we were alone, with a road we did not know, and the weight on Mr. Frodo's neck was heavier than it had ever been. We walked south along the Silverlode through the foothills of the Misty Mountains, moving fast because Aragorn wanted distance from Moria's gate, and came to the edge of Lothlorien on the second day. The Elven Wood, the Golden Wood, some called it, because the Malorn trees that grew there kept their leaves through winter, and they went gold before they fell. There were elves in the trees before we knew they were there. Haldir, their leader, came down from the branches and looked at all of us, and then looked at Gimli with particular intensity, because dwarves and the elves of Lorien had a disagreement that went back centuries and had not been resolved. He was civil about it, but only just. We were blindfolded for the walk deeper into the wood, Gimli because of the old distrust, the rest of us out of fairness to Gimli, which was Aragorn's insistence. I walked blind through the most beautiful place I had ever been in my life, and sensed it entirely through smell and sound. The particular greenish smell of enormous old trees, the way the leaves moved differently here than anywhere else, music somewhere far away. They took the blindfolds off in a clearing where the trees grew in a circle, their roots deep in a soil that felt older than the world I knew, and I looked up into branches gold and silver and green all at once and nearly sat down with the feeling it gave me. We stayed in Lothlorien for a month, or what felt like a month, though time moved strangely there. The Lady Galadriel and the Lord Celeborn received us in their high wooden hall, and Galadriel looked at each of us in turn, and I felt, looking back at her, that she was reading something in me that I had not been aware of writing, not unkindly, not invasively, but completely. She offered each of us a choice in our minds, she told us later, a chance to turn back. What she showed me in that moment was the Shire in shadow, my father's garden ruined, the mill gone wrong, the faces of people I loved, under a darkness that had come while I was away. She showed me what would happen if we failed. She also showed me a road I could take to avoid it, a road home, right now, safe. I thought about it for exactly 1 second. Then I thought about Mr. Frodo walking on without me, and that was the end of the choice. She smiled, I think. I cannot be sure. Her face was not the easiest to interpret. She had a mirror, a shallow basin she filled with water from a nearby stream, that showed things that had been, things that were happening far away, things that might come to pass if the present course held. She offered to show me. I said yes. I saw the Shire, not the Shadow Shire she had shown me in her offering, but the real one, my actual home, fields and roads and faces, and then I saw something darker overlaid on it, and I understood that the darkness was the future that would arrive if the ring stayed in the world. Then the water went clear. I asked Galadriel whether she would take the ring herself. She would be powerful enough, surely, to use it without being destroyed by it. She showed me what she would become if she took it. Tall and terrible and beautiful beyond endurance, neither light nor darkness, but something of both. Her own will and the ring's will becoming one thing, and the world remade in her image, which would not be Sauron's image but would not be freedom either. She passed the test, she said. She would diminish and remain Galadriel, and go into the west and be Galadriel still. We left Lothlorien in boats on the Silverlode, and at the parting, she gave each of us gifts. To Frodo, a glass containing the light of Eärendil, the brightest star, to be a light in dark places when all other lights went out. She packed cloaks and waybread, lembas, that could keep you walking for days on a single piece. She gave Aragorn a scabbard for the reforged sword. She gave Gimli 3 hairs from her own head, which he received with such gravity and gratitude that Legolas, watching, was visibly moved. We moved south on the great river. 3 boats, 9 people, the water wide and quiet. The Fellowship held together for 2 weeks after Lothlorien. We travelled south on the Anduin, past the brown lands on the east bank, past the islands of Parth Galen, where the woods came down to the water, past the falls of Rauros roaring in the distance. And underneath all of it, I watched Mr. Frodo, and I watched Boromir, and what I saw in both of them worried me. Frodo had grown quieter, not the quiet of rest or peace, but the quiet of something working inside him, some weight that was heavier than the day before, always heavier than the day before. The ring pulled at him in a way it did not pull at the rest of us, because the ring knew its wearer, and Frodo was its wearer now. It recognized him. It worked on him. Boromir had been growing strange since Lothlorien. He was a good man, I want to say that clearly, and what happened to him was not weakness of character, but the weight of an impossible burden on a man built to carry different kinds of weight. He was the son of Gondor's ruling steward, heir to command over a kingdom that had been fighting Sauron with everything it had for generations, losing ground slowly, year by year. His people were dying by thousands. He needed a weapon. The ring looked like a weapon. He found Frodo alone on the slopes above Amon Hen and asked for it. I was not there when it happened, but Frodo told me afterward, in fragments, over the following days. Boromir's voice when he asked was reasonable at first, even tender. Gondor needs this, just to borrow it, just to turn back one army, buy time. Frodo tried to refuse gently, and then tried to refuse firmly, and Boromir's voice changed, lost its reason, became something else. He lunged for the ring, and Frodo put it on, and vanished and ran. By the time I reached the summit of Amon Hen, the seat of seeing where the ancient kings of Gondor had built their stone chair, Frodo was sitting there in the sunlight, with the ring on his finger, looking east, looking toward Mordor, and through the ring's awareness he could see everything. Sauron's eyes swinging across the land, searching, drawn by the ring's presence. He felt the eye find him. He felt its weight like a physical thing. He took the ring off. He looked at me, and I could see he had made a decision. He was going to go on alone. He was going to take the boat to the east bank and walk into Mordor without any of us, because he had seen what the ring was doing to Boromir, and he was afraid of what it would do to the others. I said no. He said I could not come. It was too dangerous. He would lose me, like he would lose anyone. I said there was no safer place for me than by his side, and that if he went to Mordor, I would follow him, and that was the end of the debate. He went to the boats and took one. I ran into the shallows and grabbed the side of it, and he looked at me, and something in his face broke and reformed into something steadier. He pulled me in. We paddled east. Behind us, I could hear the others calling, searching the woods. I heard Pippin's voice and Merry's, and felt the particular pain of leaving people who love you without being able to say goodbye. I told myself I would see them again. The river carried us to the eastern shore. We stepped out of the boat and turned our faces toward Mordor. 2 hobbits, no wizard, no ranger, no elf or dwarf. 2 hobbits from the Shire, and between them a thing of shadow and power that every dark creature in the world was straining toward like a compass needle. That was the Fellowship, broken on the banks of the Anduin, with the falls of Rauros roaring downstream and the sky very wide and very grey overhead. We hid the boat and started walking east. The land between the Anduin and Mordor's northern gate is called the Emyn Muil, and it is genuinely awful. Jagged rock, sudden drops, paths that lead nowhere, a grey light that makes everything look equally far away. We spent 2 days getting badly lost in it, and I will not pretend otherwise. 2 hobbits from the agricultural parts of the Shire did not have ideal wilderness navigation skills, and the Emyn Mule tested every skill we did not have. We knew something was following us from the first night east of the river. Sounds, a soft scrabbling on stone. Once, eyes in the dark that caught the moonlight and then were gone. Mr. Frodo knew what it was before I did. He had heard enough of Gollum's story from Bilbo and from the council to recognize the shape of him. We caught him on a cliff face, climbing down toward us. He fell the last bit, landed badly, and I got hold of him, and he fought me with strength that should not have been possible in that thin, wet, huge-eyed creature. I tied him with the elven rope from Lorien, and it seemed to hurt him, not physically, but in some deeper way. He writhed from it and called it nasty and cruel, and wept with genuine grief over it. Frodo said to let him go. Loose the rope. I did not want to. I did not trust Gollum from that first moment of contact, and I never trusted him afterward, and everything that came from trusting him proved me right, though it all worked out in ways I could not have predicted. But Frodo said, "Loose the rope," and I loosed it. The thing about Frodo and Gollum is complicated, and I have thought about it for a very long time. Frodo pitied him. Real pity, not the kind that looks down, but the kind that recognizes something of yourself in another creature's suffering. Frodo had been carrying the ring for months by then. He knew, better than anyone, what it did to a person, what it had done to Bilbo over 60 years, and what it had done to Gollum over 500. He looked at that wretched creature and saw the wreck of what a person could become under the ring's influence, and he did not hate it. He felt a kinship with it. Gollum, for his part, had a complicated relationship with Frodo. He called him master, and seemed to mean it, at least sometimes. There was something still in him that could respond to gentleness, a remnant of Smeagol that the centuries underground had not completely extinguished. He called that part of himself Smeagol, and the ring-obsessed part Gollum, talked to himself in 2 voices, argued with himself, and seemed genuinely uncertain sometimes which one was going to win. He agreed to guide us. He knew the way into Mordor by a back path, a road we would never have found without him, the stairs of Cirith Ungol. He knew all the paths through the Dead Marshes. The Dead Marshes were a battlefield once, long ago in the Second Age, where the armies of the Last Alliance fell to Sauron's forces. The dead were buried in the wetlands, and then the marshes spread over them, and now they lay under the water, lit by pale lights that Gollum called candles. He told us not to look at them. Of course I looked. The dead lay under the water, elves and men and orcs together, their faces preserved and still, and somehow aware, and the lights danced over them, and when Frodo leaned too close, something in the water reached for him, and he nearly went in. I grabbed him and pulled him back, and we moved faster after that. The Dead Marshes gave way to the slag plain north of Mordor, the Nomen lands, a charred and broken ground with no water and no living things, only ash and cinders, and the smell of sulfur drifting west from the Black Gate. On the second night on that plain, Frodo woke me to show me the sky to the south, where a red light pulsed behind the Ethel Duath, the mountains that enclosed Mordor. That was Mount Doom. That was where we were going. I looked at it and made myself look at it for a long time, and then I lay back down and went to sleep, because there was nothing else to do. Gollum watched us both with those lamp-bright eyes and said nothing. We reached the Black Gate in the morning of the 3rd day, and it was exactly as horrible as its name implied. 2 towers, iron gates 300 feet high, an army of orcs and Easterlings going in and out, a wasteland stretching in every direction, and not one single approach that did not involve walking through thousands of soldiers who would kill us on sight. Gollum said he knew another way. He said there was a path that went south and then east through the mountains, a pass called Cirith Ungol. He said it was secret, He said it was safe. I did not believe either claim. But the Black Gate was not an option, and Frodo chose to trust Gollum one more time, and so we turned south and walked along the western face of the Ephel Duath. The land south of the Black Gate was called Ithilien, and it was the most beautiful thing I had seen in a long time. Ithilien had belonged to Gondor once, a garden land east of the Anduin, and though Sauron's shadow lay over it, the land itself had not forgotten what it was. Green things grew, birds called, water ran over stones. I could not quite believe that beauty was still possible this close to Mordor. It felt almost argumentative, a refusal. We were captured there, or rather, we were found, which is a different thing. Rangers of Gondor, men under the command of Faramir, son of the steward Denethor, came out of nowhere and surrounded us and had us flat on the ground before I had finished my first thought about escape. I want to say something about Faramir. He was the best argument I encountered for Gondor. His brother Boromir had wanted to take the ring and use it. Faramir, when he figured out what Frodo was carrying, which took him about 2 questions, said he would not take the ring if it lay in the road. He said that, straight-faced, looking at Frodo. He said he would not lift it and could not be prevailed upon by argument or circumstance to do so. He tested it, actually. He had his men take Gollum for questioning, and the terms of Gollum's capture were such that they could have executed him on the spot. He was caught poaching in water Gondor still considered its own. Faramir brought Frodo to watch, and said the choice of whether Gollum lived was Frodo's to make. It was a test. Faramir was finding out whether Frodo's attachment to Gollum came from the ring's influence or from something purer. He was taking the measure of the person who carried the ring. I made a speech for Gollum. I am not sure I have ever been more passionate about anything I have argued for, given how much I disliked the creature in question. But I had promised Mr. Frodo that Gollum would be safe, and so I stood there in Faramir's presence and told him why Gollum's life was worth preserving, and I meant every word. Faramir let Gollum go. He let us go too. He gave us food and water skins and pointed us toward the stairs. He said he was sorry he could not do more. He said he wished Frodo well and meant it, which was a rarer thing than it should have been. Most of the people who wished us well on this errand had something they wanted from it. Faramir wished us well and asked for nothing. I liked him enormously. The road to Cirith Ungol climbed from Ithilien up through the Ephel Duath by a series of long, zigzagging paths and then stairs, actual stone stairs cut into the cliff face by whoever had made the pass usable in ages long before mine. They were old, crumbling at the edges, slick in places, running along the face of drops that I chose not to measure with my eyes. The climbing took 2 days and involved the use of hands as well as feet for the steeper sections. Gollum moved up that cliff like water moving uphill, effortless, purposeful, entirely at home in steep rock in the dark. Watching him climb was watching something that had not been born a cave creature but had become one, had adapted so completely to underground existence that ordinary vertical surfaces were to him what a flat road was to me. I watched him also for something else, a change. It had been building since Ithilien, since Faramir's camp, since the moment when Frodo had confirmed Gollum's life was safe, and Gollum had looked at Frodo with something in his face that I can only describe as devotion, and then had seen me watching him, and had hidden the devotion under something else entirely. The 2 voices in Gollum were at war. Smeagol wanted to help Frodo and serve him faithfully and be rewarded with kindness. Gollum wanted the ring. Those 2 wants could not coexist forever, and I saw them fighting in his face during the climb, during rest stops, in the way he talked to himself when he thought neither of us could hear. On the first night of the climb, I woke very early, before Frodo, and lay still and listened. Gollum was talking to himself nearby, in the dark, 2 voices, almost inaudible. Smeagol's voice said they were almost there. They would help the master. They had promised. Gollum's voice said that once they had delivered the master to the one that lived in the pass, they could have the ring back, that she would take care of him, that the fat hobbit would be taken too, that it would all work out nicely for Smeagol, very nicely. Someone lived in Cirith Ungol, something lived there. Gollum was not leading us around her, he was leading us to her. I lay there in the dark and understood what we were walking into. I also understood that if I told Frodo, he might not believe me, because the ring's influence moved him toward trust where Gollum was concerned, and because Frodo wanted to believe Gollum was capable of loyalty, because believing that was how he coped with caring about the creature. I also understood that we had no other route. The Black Gate was impossible. The only way into Mordor was this pass, this staircase, this path past whatever Gollum was leading us to. So I got up and woke Mr. Frodo, and I said something about keeping a close watch, and I meant it as a warning, as much of a warning as I could shape from what I knew and what I could not say. Frodo looked at me for a moment and then looked at Gollum, and I thought maybe he heard more in what I said than the words themselves. We climbed. I am going to tell you about Shelob. She is called the last child of Ungoliant in some of the old lore, though Gandalf told me later that the elves disputed whether she was literally descended from that great spider darkness of the First Age, or only of the same nature. What she was, in practical terms, was a creature of enormous size and very old hunger, who had lived in the pass of Cirith Ungol since before Sauron built his towers, and whose arrangement with Sauron was one of mutual convenience. She provided a guard for the pass that required no pay or management, and he left her alone and occasionally sent orcs through, so she had something to eat. Whatever fell in Shelob's tunnels stayed in Shelob's tunnels. He did not need the scraps. Gollum had been through her tunnels before. He knew the way in, and he told himself, I think sincerely, in the Smeagol part of himself, that there was a chance they would get through without her noticing, that if they moved quickly and quietly enough, she might not stir. He had done it before. He was also planning to leave us for her. That was the Gollum part of the plan. He was holding both plans simultaneously, the way that only a creature whose personality has been split by a ring of power for 500 years can hold two completely contradictory plans simultaneously. The entrance to her tunnels was a cave in the cliff face at the top of the stairs, and the darkness inside it was absolute, not the ordinary dark of a room at night, a darkness that was itself, that pushed back against light. Frodo brought out Lady Galadriel's glass, and it blazed up in the dark, and we could see a tunnel of stone, web strands as thick as rope crossing from wall to wall, the smell of something ancient and predatory. No Gollum, he had vanished the moment we crossed the threshold. We went through fast, using the light to navigate the webs, tearing through them when we had to. The smell grew worse, the air grew heavier, the tunnel branched, and we chose the branches by what logic we could find, and kept moving, and I kept my hand on Frodo's shoulder, so I did not lose him in the dark. And then the light failed. The glass still shone, but something was snuffing it out, absorbing it, drawing it in, a weight of dark that was stronger than the light, and in that reduced glow I saw her. She was behind us. She filled the tunnel. Her body was as large as a grown man, her legs longer, and she moved with the deliberate certainty of something that has been hunting in the dark for 10,000 years and has never once failed to catch what it wanted. Her eyes caught what little light remained and threw it back multiplied, clusters of eyes going pale green in the dark. I screamed. I am not ashamed of it. I screamed, and I grabbed a torch, and it did not light, and I had the elvish knife from the Barrow-Wight's hoard, and it seemed very small. Frodo raised the glass and cried out in Elvish, words that were not his, but came through him anyway, the words Galadriel had spoken at the parting, and the glass blazed up white, and Shelob recoiled. We ran. Out of the tunnel mouth, into the grey air of the pass, and I thought for 1 second that we were through. Then I realized Gollum was behind me, on my back, his hands at my eyes. I threw him off. I hit him. He bit me, and I hit him again, and he ran, shrieking, down the cliff, gone into the rocks. I scrambled to my feet and looked for Frodo. He was on the ground ahead of me. Shelob had come back out of the tunnel mouth, faster than seemed possible, and she had him wrapped in her silk. I could see his hand free at the end of it, fingers still curled around the hilt of Sting, Bilbo's blade, the one that glowed blue in the presence of orcs. It was not glowing now. Everything was dark except a faint shimmer from the file still in his other hand. I took the ring from his neck. I am going to say that clearly because it is important, and because I have been asked about it many times since. I took the ring from around his neck, and I put it on the chain, and I put it around my own neck, and in the moment I did it, the world changed. Not the way it changed for Frodo, not with vision and temptation and the great burning eye swinging toward me. For me it was simpler and more terrible, the weight of it, the pull of it. Like holding the tide back with your hands, and a voice, very soft, saying things that sounded reasonable and were not reasonable at all, about power and completion and what I could do. I took it off almost immediately, put it in my pocket. Then I went to fight a giant spider. I drove Shelob off with the file and with Sting, which I had taken from Frodo's hand, and then I sat beside him in the pass and could not feel a heartbeat and could not make him respond, and I thought he was dead. Orcs came down from the tower above, arguing. They found Frodo. They started talking about him the way orcs talk about things they intend to take, and I stood in the shadow of the tower door and listened and heard something that shook me harder than anything Shelob had done. He is not dead. She does not kill them clean. She paralyzes them and eats them alive later. He is alive, alive, in the tower. I put the ring on and followed the orcs up the stairs and through the gate. The tower of Cirith Ungol sat above the pass like a tooth, 3 tiers of stone, staffed by 2 companies of orcs who hated each other on general principle. By the time I reached the gate, they were already fighting each other over Frodo's mithril coat, a 3-way dispute involving the 2 companies and their respective captains, and the tower was a mess of violence and grievance and dead orcs in every corridor. I went up. The ring was on my finger for most of it, and I will tell you what wearing it felt like, because I want there to be an honest account of it. It felt like standing at a height and feeling the pull to jump. It felt like a hunger that had been waiting in you for years and suddenly had a shape. The voice that spoke through it was not stupid. It knew what I cared about. It said I could save Frodo. It said I could carry it myself, take it to the fire, and be the one who ended everything. It drew a picture of me standing in the ruins of Mordor, with all of it done. Sam the Great, Sam the Gardener, Sam the conquering hero, and for one terrible second, it was beautiful. Then I thought about what a garden looks like when someone tries to force it, when someone decides what should grow where and yanks out everything that was not in the plan. A garden run by force is not a garden. It is a demonstration of power using plants. I took the ring off. I found Frodo in a room at the top of the tower, bound, stripped of everything except his own skin and the marks Shelob had left on him, and an orc captain about to interrogate him. What I did in that room, I will spare you most of, except to say that an elvish blade is a fine equalizer between a hobbit and an orc when the hobbit in question is sufficiently motivated. Frodo, when I gave him back the ring and put it around his neck myself, looked at it and looked at me with something I have never been able to fully describe. Not relief exactly, not gratitude, something deeper than both. He said, very quietly, that he had thought he had lost it. I told him he had not. I told him I had it the whole time. We found orc gear in the tower and dressed ourselves in it, helmets and cloaks and rough boots. We went out the back gate of the tower and into Mordor proper and turned south toward the mountain. The plain of Gorgoroth is the floor of Mordor, the great bowl enclosed by the Ash Mountains to the north and east, and the Ephel Duath to the west, with Mount Doom rising from the middle of it like a fist. Nothing grows there. The ground is black and broken, volcanic glass in places, cooled lava in others, and the sky is perpetually dim with the smoke and ash that pour from the mountain and drift west on the prevailing wind. Sauron's fortress of Barad-dûr stands in the east, its tower visible from everywhere on the plain, and from it his eye sweeps back and forth, never quite stopping, never truly at rest. We walked south in orc gear and tried to look like we belonged there. The main road of Mordor runs across Gorgoroth from the gate at Cirith Ungol toward Barad-dûr, and then bends south toward Mount Doom, the mountain road. Armies used it, columns of orcs, columns of men from the east and south, Easterlings and Haradrim and Variags of Khand, who had chosen or been forced to fight for Sauron, marching east to reinforce whatever battle Sauron was preparing in Gondor. We joined columns sometimes, when staying off-road would have looked more suspicious than staying on it, and walked among orcs while trying to breathe normally. Frodo was failing. The ring was heavier with every step south, heavier with every mile closer to Mount Doom, as if the closer it came to the fire that had made it, the more it pulled backward, desperately resisting. It was pulling through Frodo. I could see it. The hunch of his shoulders, the way he breathed, the way his eyes sometimes went blank for a moment, as if something inside him was fighting something else for control of his hands. He did not speak much. When he did, his voice was strange. I gave him water from the waterskins Faramir had given us, and the last of the Lorien waybread, and he ate and drank without really tasting either. I talked to him. I talked about the Shire, about Bag End's garden and what was probably blooming right now, about Rosie Cotton, who I had been meaning to ask to dance before all of this started, about the autumn turnips, about anything that had roots in the real world, because it seemed to me that the more I could keep him tethered to real things, the less purchase the ring had. When he could not walk, I carried him. I am not going to dress that up. He was a hobbit, and I was a hobbit, and we were both half-starved and barely watered, and carrying him across the broken ground of Gorgoroth was the hardest physical thing I ever did in my life, including all the climbing and all the fighting. It was not that he was heavy in the ordinary sense, he was light, but everything in me was already emptied out, and the ground was hostile, and there was no horizon in any direction that offered encouragement. I thought about the tales, the ones old Mr. Bilbo used to tell, the ones that mattered, the ones where the person in the story kept going, not because they could see the end, but because stopping was not an option. I thought about Beren and Luthien going into Angband. I thought about Eärendil sailing to Valinor. I thought about all the people in all the old stories who had done what seemed impossible because someone had to. I thought, we are in one of those stories, Mr. Frodo. And then I thought, but the people in those stories did not know they were in one. They just kept going. So I kept going. Mount Doom is called Orodruin in the Elvish tongue, and it is a volcano, a real one, with lava flows cooling on its slopes and chambers of fire deep inside, and a crack in its side high up where the fire runs close to the surface. The road up the mountain zigzags from the plain, cut into the rock by Sauron's command in the Second Age, and it is steep and narrow and very hot, and designed for purposes that did not include two small exhausted creatures trying to destroy a ring. We made the base of the mountain on the morning of March 25th of the year 3019 of the Third Age, though neither of us knew the exact date at the time. The armies of the West were fighting at the Black Gate, a battle they could not win, a battle Aragorn had called, knowing it was probably the last thing any of them would do, because bringing Sauron's full attention to the gate was the only way to give Frodo and me any chance at all on the mountain. We started climbing. Frodo fell on the slope early, and I picked him up. He walked again. He fell again. I carried him. The road was hot under my feet, even through the orc boots. The air smelled of sulfur and ash. The sky above was red and black, and the smoke of the mountain hung over everything in a canopy that blocked out the sun. The Eye of Sauron was somewhere to the east, behind us, focused on the battle at the gate, but I felt its attention like a pressure against the side of my head, and I knew Frodo felt it worse. He could not speak anymore by the time we reached the upper slopes. He was moving on something beyond physical will, something that had no word in the Shire's vocabulary. I have heard people use words like courage and endurance and strength of spirit, and those words are true, but they are smaller than what I witnessed. What I watched in Mr. Frodo on that mountain was a person burning up everything he had, down to the last reserve, and when those reserves were gone, finding more somehow, because there was still a mountain ahead of him and a reason to keep walking. I did not know Gollum was still following us. He had tracked us across all of Gorgoroth, staying back, biding his time. He was waiting for Frodo to have the ring in his hand. That was the moment he needed. We reached the Sammath Naur, the Chamber of Fire, the crack in the mountain's flank where the fire burned below, and the heat was so intense that standing in that entrance felt like stepping into a forge. Frodo walked to the edge. He stood there for a long time. I am going to tell you what I hoped. I hoped he was going to throw it. I hoped with everything I had left. I stood behind him and watched his shoulders and waited. He turned around. He said, "I have come, but I do not choose now to do what I came to do. The ring is mine." He put it on. I did not know what to do. I stood there in the heat of the Sammath Naur, with nothing in my hands and nothing left in my head, except the thought that it was over, and I did not know what over meant. Then Gollum attacked. He came from somewhere behind me, moving faster than anything so old and thin had any right to move, and he went past me for Frodo, who he could still see, even though Frodo wore the ring, because Gollum had worn the ring himself for so long that his eyes could perceive the wearer. He grabbed Frodo's hand. He bit the finger off. Frodo's finger, with the ring on it, came away in Gollum's mouth. Gollum held the ring up, held it with all the fierce joy of reunion, and then he went over the edge. He did not fall. He danced. He was too transported to notice, too overwhelmed by having the precious back to notice that the ledge ended. He swayed and capered, and then there was nothing beneath him, and he fell, with the ring, into the fire. The mountain blew open. The floor shook, the walls split, the roof cracked. Everything came apart at once. Frodo was at the edge, and I grabbed him and pulled him back, and we ran out of the chamber and down the slope, while the mountain destroyed itself around us. The world unmade for a moment, and remade again. We could feel it, not just the mountain, but something fundamental changing, some weight lifting, some darkness thinning. Barad-dûr fell. Sauron's eye, suddenly without the ring's power to sustain it, blew apart like a cloud. Every orc and Nazgul and dark thing that had been sustained by Sauron's will lost what sustained them. We sat on a rock on the slope of a disintegrating mountain and looked at the sky clearing above us, and Frodo said, "It is gone. It is done." He said it very quietly. I said, "Yes, Mr. Frodo." Then I said, "What do we do now?" And he almost laughed, and I almost laughed, and neither of us quite managed it, because we were too tired, and the mountain was still erupting beneath us. What we did was wait to die, more or less. We had both known, going in, that getting out was unlikely. The mountain was destroying itself. The plain was on fire. There was no road back that was not either blocked or burning. I found a rock that jutted out over the worst of the lava, and we sat on it, and I talked to Frodo while the world came apart. I talked about the Shire. Of course I did. About Bag End's garden in the spring, the roses coming up along the wall and the smell of morning. about what he and Bilbo used to cook for breakfast on the first cool day of autumn, about whether Rosy Cotton would be at the harvest dance when we got back. When I got back, I had to believe it. I said it out loud so I would have to believe it. The eagles came. Gandalf sent them. Gandalf was back, white and renewed, the same spirit in a new form, and he had had enough forethought to think about what would happen if Frodo and I actually succeeded and would need someone to collect us. 3 eagles, great and golden, came out of the north and took us from the rock and carried us up out of the smoke and ash and into clean air and clean light. Frodo slept in the eagle's feathers for most of the journey north, and I held his injured hand wrapped in my cloak and watched him sleep and felt something I still do not have a word for. Not relief, not joy, something that those words are trying to point at without quite reaching. We woke in Ithilien, the same Ithilien where Faramir had found us, the beautiful land east of the Anduin with the green things growing, and we woke in white beds in a pavilion under the trees, and the sunlight came through the branches and made patterns on the ceiling, and the air smelled of flowers. Gandalf was there. He was laughing, which was not what I expected from Gandalf, but his eyes were bright and his face was changed, the worry gone out of it that had been there since the night we left Rivendell, and he looked at us with something that was close to joy. Mr. Frodo woke first, and they talked quietly for a while. When I woke, Gandalf looked at me and said, "Well, Master Gamgee, you have done it." I told him I did not do it alone. He said he knew. Merry and Pippin came through the tent flap a few minutes later, both in fine clothes and carrying armfuls of food, and all 4 of us hobbits were in the same place at the same time for the first time since Aemon Hen. Pippin had been in Minas Tirith and had fought in the battle there. Merry had ridden with the Rohirrim to the Pelennor fields and had helped bring down the Lord of the Nazgul. Both of them had stories I was not going to be able to fully believe until I heard them in detail many times over, and they looked at me with the same expression. I cried. I will say it plainly. I sat on the edge of the bed with my injured hand and my orc boots and my general state of filth, and I cried while 4 people I loved were all in the same place alive, and I was not sorry about it then, and I am not sorry now. There was a ceremony in the field of Cormallen, a great open space where the armies of the West had gathered after the battle, and Frodo and I were brought to it on horses, which struck me as somewhat excessive because we were small and the horses were large, and I had never been entirely comfortable with horses. But we rode to the center of that field, and the king was there. Aragorn. He was crowned by then, crowned by Gandalf, on the walls of Minas Tirith, king of the reunited kingdom of Gondor, and Arnor, the first king since Ernor, 2,967 years before. He wore the white crown and the silver and sable of his line, and he looked, I will say it, like exactly what he was. Not just a ranger anymore, not just Strider from the Prancing Pony. The age-long line of kings, alive in one person, standing in the sunlight of the field. He looked at Frodo, and then at me. He knelt. The king of Gondor knelt before 2 hobbits from the Shire. Then all the swords came up, and the horns sounded, and every person on that field was on their feet, and I stood there in the middle of it, with Mr. Frodo beside me, and tried to keep my face composed, and mostly failed. I will tell you what I was thinking in that moment, if you want the truth of it. I was thinking about Bag End's garden, and whether the late summer roses had come back after my father potted them in. I was thinking about Rosy Cotton and the harvest dance. I was thinking that the Shire was still there, that all of this had worked, that the thing we had gone to do had been done, and that somewhere in the north, the hedgerows were going golden, and the last of the blackberries were coming in, and the smoke from cottage chimneys was going straight up in the still autumn air. I was thinking, home. We went home the long way, north from Minas Tirith, through Rohan and Isengard, and the Shire Road, traveling as guests of kings, stopping in places that had been battlegrounds and seeing what they looked like after the fighting. Rohan was burying its dead. The Rohirrim had lost their king, Theoden, on the Pelennor, and Aragorn had made Éomer king in his place, and Éomer was already busy with the work of rebuilding a country that had spent a year in a war it had not quite chosen. Isengard was a ruin. Saruman's tower, Orthanc, still stood because nothing could pull it down, but the circle of stone and mechanism around it had been torn apart by Ents, the tree herders of Fangorn, who had a grievance with Saruman's deforestation that went back longer than the war. The Ents had flooded the whole complex. Where Saruman's great works had stood, there was now a lake and a garden, the beginning of a forest, grass and reeds and young trees. Treebeard, who is the oldest of the Ents, and whose name in his own tongue would take 3 days to say, met us there and gave his report with the particular thoroughness of a creature for whom 3 days is not a long time. He had Saruman and Grima Wormtongue penned in Orthanc. Aragorn let them go, which surprised me, and I think surprised Saruman as well. We went north. On the last days of October, in the early grey of a morning that smelled of cold rain and fallen leaves, we came down the road and saw the borders of the Shire. Something was wrong. The wrong note came in layers. The hedge at the Brandywine Bridge was broken down. The lane was churned up. Men were standing at a toll gate. Men who had no business being at a toll gate on the Shire Road. Men with hard faces and Saruman's livery. They told us to move along. There were no visitors permitted to the Shire, and they said it with the confidence of people who expected to be obeyed. We did not move along. Merry and Pippin and I got off our horses and explained to those men, in terms that left nothing ambiguous, that they were standing on Shire soil with no legal authority whatsoever, and that if they wanted to keep the swords they were wearing, they would lower them now. The men lowered the swords. Merry blew a horn, one of Rohan's horns, given to him by Éowyn, and it carried all the way to the next village. What we found in the Shire made me angrier than I had been at any point in the war. Not Shelob, not the dead marshes, not Gorgoroth. The Shire. Saruman had retreated here, the beaten wizard with no power left, and he had spent the last months of the war doing the only damage he could still do, burning hobbit homes, cutting down trees, replacing decent buildings with orc-built concrete and corrugated iron sheds, and running the whole country through a bureaucracy of lies and misery under the name of the chief, who turned out to be Lotho Sackville Baggins, Frodo's cousin, who had sold his soul for influence and then discovered too late that Saruman's kind of influence left you with nothing. Grima Wormtongue had killed Lotho weeks before we arrived. We organized the Shire. Merry and Pippin, who had come home from a war and were not inclined to be patient, rode ahead and raised the villages. Hobbits who had been sitting under their trouble quietly stood up all at once, and there were 1,000 of them before noon, armed with whatever came to hand. The ruffians, as the hired men were called, found themselves facing a country that had decided enough and were not much of a match for that decision. Saruman himself stood in the road at Bag End, facing Frodo, and tried to kill him. He had a knife. He stabbed at Frodo, and the blade turned on the mithril coat, which Frodo still wore, and Saruman's face fell apart for a moment, all the ruin of what he had been showing through the spite. Frodo said, "Go, get out of the Shire, and do not come back." Saruman went. As he walked away, Grima Wormtongue came down the lane behind him and struck him from behind, driven to the edge of something by years of abuse and no way out. Saruman died in the road in front of Bag End, and his spirit rose from him as smoke and was scattered by the west wind, and that was the end of him. What he had done to the Shire took years to undo. Not everything that was burned can be rebuilt, and not every tree that was cut can be replanted, but trees can be coaxed back when you have the Lady Galadriel's gift to help them. She had given me a small box of earth from her garden, Lorien soil, and a single seed. I planted the seed in the party field, where the old party tree had stood before Sharky's men cut it down, on a day in January when the ground was still hard. The tree that came from that seed was a silver-leafed malorn, the only one outside of Lorien, and it flowered gold in the spring and became a landmark in the Shire that people came to see from the neighboring villages. I planted it and stood back and looked at what I had done and felt something that was neither the grief of the war nor the joy of coming home, but the particular satisfaction of a gardener who has put the right thing in the right ground. Frodo's shoulder never fully healed. The knife injury from Weathertop had been treated and largely closed by Elrond in Rivendell, but the memory of it stayed in the body, and once a year, on the anniversary of that night, Frodo would go very pale and very quiet, and the pain would return, and he would spend several days somewhere I could not quite reach him. He also carried what he had done on the slopes of Mount Doom, what he had felt and heard and almost become. The ring was gone from the world, but Frodo had worn it and had been its wearer for the last terrible miles, and you do not carry something like that for as long as he carried it and come out of the other side entirely unchanged. He wrote it all down. He finished Bilbo's book and wrote his own continuation in it. The whole story from the night he left Bag End to the morning we woke in Ithilien, and he called it the Red Book of Westmarch, and wrote my name and Bilbo's name and Gandalf's name and all the others. He wrote it carefully, as if getting every word exactly right was the most important thing he could do with the time he had. I think I knew, before he told me. Bilbo was going into the west, to Valinor, the Undying Lands, where the elves who had carried the great burden of the age could finally put it down and rest. Elrond was going, Galadriel was going, Gandalf was going, and Frodo, because of what he had carried and what it had done to him, had been granted the same passage. He told me on the 2nd of September, in the evening, in Bag End's garden, very quietly. He said he had been given a place on the last ship. He said the damage he carried could not be healed in Middle-earth. He said he had thought a long time about whether to tell me early or wait until we were at the Havens. He had told me early. I stood in the garden and looked at the malorn tree, already taller than a man, its silver leaves catching the last light, and I did not say anything for a while. Then I said, "When?" He said, "A month." We rode south and west in late September, the 6 of us who had started this all those years before, Frodo and me, Merry and Pippin, Gandalf and Bilbo, who had come down from Rivendell for the last time. We met the elves on the road, Galadriel and Celeborn and Elrond and their company, glimmering in the dusk of the forest road. The Havens of the Grey are where the River Lune meets the sea, a city the elves built in the First Age and used as a port for all the long centuries since. Círdan the shipwright, who is older than almost anything still walking in Middle-earth, stood at the quay with a ship behind him. The September evening smelled of salt. Frodo and I said goodbye without quite doing it cleanly. There are things you cannot say in those moments. The words for them do not exist. What I knew was that this person had trusted me with the most important thing he had ever done, and that I had been right to follow him out of the Shire, and that the world was better for it, and I was better for it, and he had paid more for it than anyone should have had to pay. He hugged me. I held on longer than I should have. Then he walked up the gangplank, and Gandalf after him, and Bilbo last of all, shuffling and small and still humming under his breath, and the ship moved out from the quay on a wind that came out of the west, which is not the direction the wind usually comes from in that harbor. I stood between Merry and Pippin, and we watched until the light of the ship was gone. They went home eventually. Merry back to Buckland, Pippin back to Tuckborough, both of them tall and weathered and full of stories that the Shire would spend a generation absorbing. They had both become masters of their respective families, as was appropriate. They had both done things in that war that deserved the telling. I went back to Bag End. I had been given Bag End, which surprised me and should not have. Frodo had arranged it. He had had Lobelia Sackville Baggins's money returned to her and her son's estate settled, and the whole matter of who owned Bag End sorted out, and he had put my name on the deed before he left. I walked up the lane in October with the evening coming on, and unlocked the door, and stood in the entryway. The study where Bilbo used to recite aloud, the kitchen with its broad window looking west, the garden overgrown, needing work, the malorn tree visible over the back wall, growing steadily. I went back to work. That spring I asked Rosie Cotton to marry me, and she said yes, and we moved into Bag End together, and the garden came back over the following years in ways that would have made my father very proud. Rosie and I had 13 children. 13. The eldest I named Eleanor, after the gold flowers of Lorien that Galadriel had kept in her garden, and Eleanor was the one who eventually carried the Red Book into the keeping of the Westmarch, where it lives still. I served as mayor of the Shire for 7 years, which I found surprisingly satisfying and not at all what I expected from myself. It turned out that the same patience that made a good gardener made a decent mayor. You listen more than you talk. You figure out what the ground needs, not what you want to plant. You make your plans 3 seasons out and adjust them when the weather changes. I am an old hobbit now. Mr. Frodo would be very old if he were here, and he is somewhere in the West, in a place where such things can finally heal. I think about that. I have thought about it for years, whether the healing actually works, whether he got there and found something more like peace than he could have found here. I think he did. I have no reason for believing that, except that I want to believe it, and wanting something very much for a very long time has a way of becoming its own kind of evidence. The War of the Ring is what they call it now in the history books that the men of Gondor write. The scholars in Minas Tirith have volumes on it. The battles, the strategy, the political arrangements that followed, who owned what lands after the realms were reunified. They debate dates and distances and the relative merits of various commanders' decisions. They do not write much about Gorgoroth, about carrying someone across black glass and cooled lava because there was simply no other option, about the plain truth that 2 hobbits from the Shire walked into Mordor while the world was looking the other way, and that the ring went into the fire because of what happened in those days, and that the war was won not on the Pelennor or at the Black Gate, but on the side of a mountain in the dark. People ask me what it was like, and I never quite know how to start. What it was like was this. It was like being a gardener who has a piece of ground that needs tending, and the ground is on fire, and there are things in the fire that want to eat you, and the only tool you have is a small elvish knife and the knowledge that the ground matters, and so you tend it. You do the work in front of you. You carry what needs carrying. You come home when you can. What I brought back from the War of the Ring was the Shire itself. That was the thing I went for. That was the thing that made every step across Gorgoroth possible. Not glory, not a name in the histories. The smell of pipeweed in the autumn, the fire going in the kitchen, the children running down the lane in the evening. The world is worth defending. I know that now in a way I could not have known it before I left. It is worth defending down to the last ordinary thing, the garden gate that needs its hinge oiled, the blackbird that sings from the same branch every morning, the taste of bread still warm from the oven. All of it worth every step of the road we walked. Mr. Frodo knew that better than I did. He carried it farther than I could have. He was the bravest person I ever knew, and I have known some remarkable people. He trusted me to tend the garden when he was gone. I have. I will. Well, I am back. Thank you for joining Lords and Lions as we heard the War of the Ring told in the voice it always deserved, the voice of Samwise Gamgee. If his story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that ordinary faithfulness changes everything. We will see you next time.